infested, crops destroyed, the mice plaguing the bush have families and farmers at their wits' end.
They're certainly making a mess, and the odour's quite overpowering. Every morning we take the dead ones away.
For months, pleas for financial help have fallen on deaf ears.
There is no amount of money on this earth that will make the mice go away.
Weeks ago, the Canadian province of British Columbia registered all-time record temperatures. Hundreds of people died in connection with the extreme heat, and the impact on ecosystems was devastating. Scientists say up to 1 billion shellfish may have perished.
We begin in China, where large swathes of Henan province are underwater after being pummeled by torrential rain. Weather forecasters say it is the heaviest downpour in 1,000 years. At least 12 people were killed in the provincial capital of Zhangzhou, as hundreds were trapped in a flooded subway line. Many residents were left stranded in schools or at their workplace, with floodwaters turning city streets into roaring rivers. Authorities have evacuated more than 100,000 people to safe zones as China's military blasted a nearby dam to release floodwaters, threatening one of the country's most heavily populated provinces.
Well, this Sunday there were mass protests, not only in Havana, the capital where I'm speaking to you from, but throughout the island in over 10 cities spanning from east to west. And these were mass protests, the likes of which we haven't seen in Cuba for decades. Thousands of people in Havana, thousands of people across Cuba calling for an end to the communist one-party government, calling for medicine, calling for vaccinations, calling for food. There was a very wide array of discontent, mainly, it should be said, economic discontent. The country is going through a vicious economic crisis brought on both by the pandemic and US sanctions on Cuba, which were hardened substantially by the Trump administration and have not been softened by the Biden administration. These sanctions have led to a shortfall in hard currency that the Cuban government needs to import food or medicine, and that's playing out on the streets now because people are standing in line for hours on end to buy chicken, and pharmacy shelves are barren.
Germany is witnessing once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-millennium floods, in fact. The worst floods in 1,000 years and the worst natural disaster in almost 6 decades. The situation is being called terrifying. It's been 5 days and the floods haven't died down. And the devastation is not limited to Germany. In fact, it has spread to Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Switzerland, Luxembourg and parts of Italy. So what is the scale of the damage? How many lives have been lost? And what is being done to ease the situation? Our next report explores.
Roads turned into rivers. Vehicles swept away like toys. Swaths of land buried under thick mud. And narrow escapes that are horrifying to watch. This devastation is occurring simultaneously in 7 European countries. Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Italy, Austria and Germany. The total death toll in these countries has soared to over 180. The worst hit is Germany. This is Germany's worst natural disaster in more than half a century. This is the aftermath of a severe mudslide triggered by the floods. This is in West Germany, where several areas have become inaccessible and hundreds have gone missing or are unreachable. Towns near river valleys and low-lying plains are worse off. This is the town of Bad Schandau, situated along the river Elbe. This is how torrents of water are cascading through its streets. In Berchtesgaden, roads have become impassable. Railway tracks are covered in mud.
Haiti
Haiti is in crisis after the assassination of the country's president, Jovenel Moïse, last week. The country's interim prime minister and Senate president are now struggling for control as investigators search for the motive behind the attack. Haiti is asking the U.S. and UN to deploy troops in hopes of stabilizing the situation. The Biden administration said on Saturday that there are no plans to put boots on the ground there.
A huge search and rescue operation is underway in Japan tonight after a landslide swept away an entire section of a city. The disaster was triggered by heavy rains and more than a dozen people are missing. Kate Creedon reports.
Locals could hear it before they could see it. A wall of water and mud collecting everything in its way. Furniture, cars, entire homes swept up in its rage. Power poles exploding as they were torn from their foundations. This driver, while trying to avoid the initial trickle, unknowingly turns into the path of destruction.
Lebanon's Prime Minister-designate has announced he is stepping down after failing to form a coalition government. The decision threatens to sink Lebanon deeper into crisis. The country remains without a government for nearly a year. The last one was forced to resign after the huge explosion at a Beirut port last August. Political squabbling has repeatedly obstructed efforts to form a government and sent the currency to unprecedented lows. Imported medicine and fuel are increasingly on a
fire and fury on the streets of Beirut. Lebanon is descending fast into an economic crisis that the World Bank says will likely rank among the world's worst of the last 150 years. All the people are hungry. No one has anything to eat. There's no electricity in our homes. Children need milk and no one can afford to buy it. That's why we're here.
The economy. The country has now been under a lockdown for a pretty long period of time, slightly over a month, and there is no end in sight because the infection rates are continuing to creep up. So first and foremost is the concern over the economy. Second, people want the government to assist them, provide financial aid for small businesses and particularly the very large informal sector. There is some aid, but perhaps it doesn't go far enough to assist members of the public that are hardest hit by the economic fallout. So people want government to handle these things, but yet, they get troubled because, social media is awash with pictures of crowded hospitals and, and also the political stories of turmoil and politicking that seems to be unending.
All right, so let's start this broadcast with the updates that are coming in from Myanmar, where Myanmar's political crisis is worsening. And according to the latest updates that have come in, over 180 people have been killed so far since the 1st of February. Now, thousands of people are also said to have been injured after they participated in the demonstrations, and many thousands have been detained. Now, earlier, the military had imposed martial law in Myanmar's commercial capital, Yangon, and since the announcement, hundreds of thousands of people have in fact fled from the region, fearing for their life and security. So this is what the scene was like once martial law was imposed in Yangon, which is the largest city in Myanmar. People wanted to get out of it as soon as they could.
Days of stormy weather brought heavy rain, triggering flooding in the southern province, in particular in the provincial capital Salalah. Oman Meteorology reported that, in a period from 15 to 17 July, Myrbat in Dhofar province recorded 351 millimeters of rain, Sada 262 millimeters and Salalah 202 millimeters. Further rain is expected. The Public Authority for Civil Defense and Ambulances said one person died when a house collapsed and another when a vehicle was swept away by water in Salalah on 16th of July. A fatality was reported the previous day when a man died in floodwaters attempting to cross a wadi. Pachda rescued dozens of people from floodwaters, many of them from stranded vehicles. Authorities also evacuated around 100 people and delivered food to residents stranded in villages on the outskirts of Salalah.
شوف اليرد يا الله يا ساتر يا ساتر يا ساتر يا ساتر شوف كيف انتحدر يا
Huge queues have formed outside stores in South Africa. The panic buying comes after a week of some of the worst violence seen in the country in decades, which left hundreds of shops ransacked and looted. Tensions exploded over the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma on corruption charges, quite a few of them as well. Locals speak of a desperate situation.
There's no rice here, stock is finished. I don't know what I'm going to eat with my child. I got this small rice for me. Hey, even in my life, I can't buy this small thing like this because of this thing. Hey, I don't know what we're going to do for the next 2 months.
We're just trying to see what we can get, what's needed at home, what we're running short of, just fill our cupboards just to keep us going, because it's been a frustrating week.
Due to the panic buying, there is a shortage of bread ingredients. People are waiting in the queues for long whiles, and it's actually sad to see that some bread trucks have been taken down and bread being thrown into the river. There are a lot of people out there, old, young, sickly, that are battling to get just one loaf of bread.
Hundreds of shops have been destroyed by the looters. Some locals have been forced to arm themselves to defend their businesses, alleging, quite incredibly, that some police officers have been stealing as well, and others have lost literally everything.
Announcement. On June 21st, Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven became the first Prime Minister in the country's history to be ousted by a no-confidence vote. Since then, the country's politics have been in turmoil, without a permanent government or a clear route. The last few years have been difficult for most countries, for Turkey especially so. The country is continuing to face a currency crisis and a recession. Then the pandemic hit, and there's also just general political turmoil in the country, all of which has eroded President Erdogan's image, popularity and support at the worst possible time.
All of us have been born and raised in an era where the United States of America was the most powerful country in the world, and it was in a position to determine many things on the global stage. For example, whether or not there was war in certain countries, like Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and many others. America decided whether or not foreign presidents would remain in power, whether or not entire towns would be destroyed by drone attacks. For the past century, the basic of geopolitics was, if America wants it, it's going to happen. Now, all of that is going to change in the next 5 years. And most of us will be around to witness that. That means that many of us are going to experience an entirely new world in which the United States of America is no longer dominant. In the Western world, we are so much used to the dominant position of the United States that we don't see or don't want to see the tilt in the global balance of power that is unfolding right in front of us.